Senator John Kennedy just ended AOC's career with undeniable evidence. Senator John Kennedy sat at the committee table in Hart Senate Office Building Room 218. His binder of notes neatly arranged before him, his pale blue eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. The Louisiana senator, renowned for his razor-sharp intellect and disarming Southern courtesy, had spent months orchestrating this moment. Today, he would confront Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the progressive powerhouse whose viral social media presence and bold rhetoric had made her a political phenomenon. AOC strode into the chamber, her tailored blazer impeccable, her expression radiating confidence, unaware that Kennedy had laid a trap with the precision of a master strategist. The hearing, framed as a routine examination of campaign finance transparency, was anything but ordinary. It was Kennedy's stage to hold AOC accountable with a mountain of evidence meticulously gathered to expose inconsistencies in her record. The room hummed with tension as Chairman Johnson's gavel fell. "The committee will come to order," he declared, his voice carrying a gravity that hinted at the stakes. "Today we address critical questions about campaign finance integrity and the responsibilities of elected officials." The words were a signal to those in the know this was no standard oversight session. Kennedy's team had worked in absolute secrecy, compiling a dossier that could rival a legal brief. Campaign finance reports, social media archives, consulting contracts, and public statements had been dissected with forensic precision. Every questionable expense, every contradictory tweet, every public remark had been catalogued, cross-referenced, and verified. Kennedy had consulted campaign finance experts, financial analysts, and even former colleagues of AOC to ensure his case was airtight. His goal was clear: to use facts delivered with his trademark civility to challenge AOC's carefully crafted image as an unassailable progressive icon. AOC settled into her seat, her posture relaxed but alert, her aides whispering urgently as they scanned the room. The gallery was packed with an unusual crowd. Grassroots activists clutching folders of data on AOC's campaign spending, small business owners skeptical of her economic proposals, and reporters with phones poised to capture every moment. The energy was electric, a stark departure from the usual monotony of Senate hearings. AOC's team sensed the shift, their unease growing as they noticed the absence of the typical lobbyists and policy wonks. Instead, the audience was a mix of concerned citizens and analysts, all drawn by whispers of a high-stakes showdown. AOC, however, remained unfazed, her confidence rooted in her ability to navigate criticism. She had turned attacks into rallying cries before framing herself as a target of establishment pushback. But Kennedy was no ordinary adversary. His preparation was exhaustive, his strategy relentless, and his demeanor deceptively gentle. Kennedy's binder was his weapon, each page a potential blow to AOC's credibility. He had spent late nights with his staff, poring over financial disclosures, tracking campaign expenditures, and analyzing her public statements. They had uncovered payments to consulting firms that raised questions, social media posts that contradicted her public positions, and financial reports that didn't add up. Kennedy had anticipated every defense AOC might offer, from claims of misinterpretation to accusations of partisan bias. He knew she would lean on her charisma, her ability to reframe criticism as evidence of her outsider status. But he was ready to counter with hard evidence presented with the calm precision that had made him a legend in Washington. His Louisiana drawl, slow and deliberate, had a way of lulling witnesses into a false sense of security before he struck with a question so incisive it left them scrambling. The contrast between Kennedy and AOC was stark. She was the face of a new generation of politics, young, bold, unapologetically progressive, with a social media following that rivaled pop stars. Her tweets and Instagram stories resonated with millions, casting her as a champion for the working class and a thorn in the side of the powerful. Kennedy, at 73, embodied a different kind of authority, methodical, principled, rooted in a commitment to accountability. His charcoal suit, tailored to perfection, spoke of Southern refinement, while his quiet confidence conveyed a man who had never lost a debate that mattered. Where AOC thrived on passion and visibility, Kennedy relied on preparation and intellect. This wasn't just a clash of personalities. It was a test of whether charisma could withstand the weight of undeniable facts. The gallery buzzed as observers settled in, their anticipation palpable. A group of activists representing grassroots organizations held documents detailing AOC's campaign finances, their faces stern as they prepared to hear her explanations. Small business owners, frustrated by her economic rhetoric, exchanged glances, their skepticism evident. Reporters from independent outlets, cameras rolling, were ready to broadcast every exchange to a national audience. AOC's aides grew increasingly nervous, their whispers more urgent as they pointed out familiar faces in the crowd. Activists who had publicly questioned AOC's spending, analysts who had written about her inconsistencies. AOC, however, maintained her composure, checking her notes and exchanging quick words with her team. She had faced tough rooms before and emerged stronger, her base rallying around her narrative of resistance. But she didn't know that Kennedy had studied her every move, from her first campaign flyer to her latest viral post. Kennedy's preparation was nothing short of extraordinary. His team had spent months digging into AOC's record, starting with her 2018 campaign that had catapulted her to fame. They had uncovered payments to consulting firms that seemed excessive for the services rendered, travel expenses that raised eyebrows, and public statements that didn't align with her actions. One particular consulting firm, tied to a close associate, had received hundreds of thousands of dollars, prompting questions about conflicts of interest. Kennedy had cross-checked these payments against federal election laws, consulting experts to ensure his interpretation was sound. He had also analyzed AOC's social media activity, identifying posts that exaggerated policy impacts or contradicted her public stances. Every piece of evidence was documented, organized, and ready to be deployed. Kennedy wasn't here to score cheap points. He was here to demand accountability from a public servant whose influence demanded scrutiny. As the clock ticked closer to the start, the room grew quieter, the tension almost tangible. AOC's aides leaned in, their voices low, as they tried to gauge the mood of the crowd. One pointed out a reporter from a major outlet, known for incisive coverage of campaign finance issues. Another noted a group of small business owners, their expressions guarded but attentive. AOC, still confident, adjusted her blazer and glanced at her notes, ready to defend her record. She had built her career on bold ideas and fearless rhetoric, and she was prepared to pivot any criticism into a broader discussion of systemic inequality. But Kennedy had anticipated this. He knew her playbook, her knack for turning questions into opportunities, her ability to rally supporters with a single tweet. His strategy was to keep her on the defensive, using her own words and actions to expose vulnerabilities she couldn't spin away. When Kennedy spoke, his voice was calm, his drawl measured. Representative Ocasio-Cortez. "Thank you for being here," he began, his tone warm but laced with steel. "I appreciate your willingness to help us clarify some important matters regarding campaign finance and public accountability." The courtesy was deliberate, a hallmark of Kennedy's style, designed to disarm while setting the stage for tough questions. AOC nodded, her voice steady. "Thank you, Senator. I'm happy to assist the committee." To the casual observer, it was a routine exchange, but those familiar with Kennedy's methods knew better. His smile, gentle and unassuming, hid a relentless determination. He flipped open his binder, his fingers resting on the first page of evidence, a campaign finance report that would set the tone for what was to come. The senator's approach was rooted in his belief that no one, no matter how popular, was above scrutiny. AOC's rise had been remarkable, but with influence came responsibility. Kennedy had seen her galvanize a movement, but he had also seen the cracks in her record cracks he was determined to expose. His questions would be precise, his evidence overwhelming, and his delivery unrelentingly polite. He had studied AOC's speeches, her interviews, her financial disclosures, knowing that the truth, carefully presented, was his greatest weapon. AOC, for her part, was ready to defend her vision, her policies, her record. She had faced critics before and come out stronger. But she didn't know that Kennedy had turned her own words into a trap, one that would test her ability to answer for her actions in a way she had never faced before. The room held its breath as Kennedy prepared his first question. The activists in the gallery leaned forward, their folders open, ready to compare AOC's answers with their data. The business owners watched closely, their skepticism tempered by curiosity. The reporters, sensing a story, adjusted their cameras. AOC's aides exchanged worried glances, their confidence shaken by the weight of the moment. Kennedy's binder lay open, its pages, a roadmap to a reckoning. He had spent months building this case, and now, with the nation watching, he was ready to begin. AOC, unaware of the storm about to break, sat poised, her eyes meeting Kennedy's, with a mix of defiance and determination. The hearing was about to become a defining moment, not just for AOC, but for the principle that accountability applies to everyone, no matter how bright their star. The trap was set, and Senator John Kennedy was ready to spring it. Senator John Kennedy leaned forward in his seat. His binder opened to a page marked with precise annotations, his Louisiana drawl cutting through the tense silence of Hart Senate Office Building, Room 216. The hearing on campaign finance transparency had taken a sharp turn, and all eyes were on Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who sat across from him, her expression a mix of confidence and caution. Kennedy, with his trademark Southern courtesy, had begun his questioning, and the room knew this was no ordinary exchange. His goal was to hold AOC accountable, not with bluster, but with the relentless precision of facts. He turned to her social media record, a treasure trove of bold statements that had fueled her rise, but now served as ammunition for his inquiry. Representative Ocasio-Cortez. He began, his voice warm but deliberate. I'd like to discuss some of your public statements, particularly those you've shared online. They've garnered quite a bit of attention, and I think the American people deserve clarity on what you meant. AOC nodded, her posture steady, her eyes meeting Kennedy's. I'm happy to clarify, Senator, she replied, her tone firm but measured. She was no stranger to scrutiny. Her tweets and Instagram posts had made her a political star, resonating with millions who saw her as a voice for change. But Kennedy had spent months analyzing her online presence, identifying posts that exaggerated policy impacts or clashed with her public positions. His binder contained printouts of tweets, screenshots of stories, and notes on their reception, each one a potential point of contention. He wasn't here to attack her popularity, but to probe the substance behind her words, exposing inconsistencies with the calm, incisive questions that had become his hallmark. Let's start with a post from last year, Kennedy said, consulting his notes with theatrical deliberation. You tweeted, and I quote, "The top 1% hold more wealth than the bottom 90% combined. It's time to tax the ultra-rich and fund a fair economy." Now, ma'am, that's a powerful statement, and it got a lot of traction, hundreds of thousands of likes, if I'm not mistaken. Could you walk us through what you meant by fund a fair economy, and how taxing the ultra-rich would achieve that. The question seemed straightforward, but its simplicity was deceptive. Kennedy knew AOC's rhetoric often leaned on bold, sweeping claims that sounded compelling but crumbled under scrutiny. He was giving her a chance to explain, knowing her answer would set the tone for what was to come. AOC leaned forward, her voice animated. "Senator, I was highlighting the extreme wealth inequality in our country. The top 1% have amassed unprecedented wealth, while working families struggle to afford healthcare, housing, and education. By taxing the ultra-rich, those with incomes in the millions or billions, we can fund programs like universal healthcare, affordable housing, and free college, creating a more equitable system." Her response was polished, echoing the talking points that had energized her base. But Kennedy's expression remained unchanged, his smile gentle but unyielding. He flipped a page in his binder, his fingers pausing on a highlighted line. "I appreciate your passion, ma'am," he said, his drawl softening the edge of his words. "But let's dig a bit deeper. In that same thread, you suggested a 70% marginal tax rate on incomes over $10 million. Now, I'm no economist, but I've talked to a few, and they tell me that such a rate might generate about $70 billion a year, give or take. That's a lot of money, but your proposals, universal health care, free college, affordable housing, could cost upwards of $3 trillion annually, according to some estimates. Could you help the committee understand how a $70 billion tax increase covers a $3 trillion price tag?" The question landed like a well-aimed dart, exposing the gap between AOC's rhetoric and fiscal reality. The gallery stirred reporters scribbling notes as AOC's aides exchanged glances. AOC's response was quick, her tone confident. "Senator, those numbers are just one part of the equation. A fair economy isn't just about one tax rate. It's about closing loopholes, cracking down on offshore tax havens, and ensuring corporations pay their fair share. Combined, these measures can generate significant revenue to invest in our communities." She pivoted smoothly, broadening the discussion to avoid the specific math. But Kennedy was ready, his preparation evident in the way he anticipated her deflection. He adjusted his glasses, his smile never wavering, and pressed forward. "That's a mighty fine point, ma'am," he said, his voice dripping with courtesy. "But let's stick with that 70% rate for a moment, since it was the centerpiece of your tweet. You said it would fund a fair economy. Now I've got here a report from the Tax Policy Center, nonpartisan folks, by the way, that says even with a 70% rate, the revenue wouldn't come close to covering the programs you mentioned. In fact, they estimate it might fund about 2% of a universal healthcare plan. Were you aware of those figures when you made that statement, or was it more about, say, making a broader point?" The question was devastating in its politeness, forcing AOC to either admit a lack of precision or defend an overstatement. The room grew quieter, the weight of Kennedy's logic settling over the audience. AOC's jaw tightened slightly, but she maintained her composure. "Senator, my goal was to spark a conversation about wealth inequality and the need for bold solutions. The exact numbers are complex, and I rely on experts to refine the details. But the principle remains: we need to address the concentration of wealth to build a fairer society." Her answer was earnest, but Kennedy's expression suggested he wasn't satisfied. He leaned back, his fingers steepled his voice, taking on a tone of genuine curiosity. "I understand the need for conversation, ma'am," he said, "but when a member of Congress tweets something like that, folks tend to take it as a serious proposal, not just a talking point. Small business owners, like some of the ones in this room, read your words and worry about what a 70% tax rate might mean for them. They're not the ultra-rich, but they're working hard to keep their businesses afloat. Did you consider how your statement might be interpreted by those folks, or was it aimed more at your online audience? The question shifted the focus to AOC's responsibility as a public figure, highlighting the real-world impact of her rhetoric. The business owners in the gallery nodded, their skepticism evident, as AOC's aides whispered urgently, "Senator, my focus is on working families and small businesses, not burdening them." AOC replied, her voice firm, "My proposals target the ultra-wealthy, not everyday entrepreneurs. If my language caused confusion, that wasn't my intent." She offered a clarification, but Kennedy was already moving to his next point. His binder opened to another marked page. His preparation was relentless, each question building on the last to expose a pattern of bold but imprecise rhetoric. "Let's move to another post," Kennedy said, his tone as polite as ever. "A few months back, you shared an Instagram story claiming that corporate greed is driving inflation through price gouging. You said companies were raising prices to pad their profits, not because of supply chain issues or labor costs. That got a lot of attention, millions of views, I believe. Could you explain what evidence you based that claim on?" The question was another trap, designed to test AOC's command of the facts behind her viral statements. Kennedy had consulted economists who argued inflation was driven by a mix of factors: supply chain disruptions, energy costs, demand surges, not just corporate behavior. He was ready to contrast her claim with data. AOC leaned forward, her voice passionate. "Senator, we've seen record corporate profits while families struggle with rising costs for groceries, gas, and rent. Companies like big oil and grocery chains have raised prices far beyond their cost increases, taking advantage of economic uncertainty. That's what I meant by price gouging, and it's backed by reports showing profit margins at historic highs." Her response was forceful, tapping into the frustration of her base. But Kennedy's smile remained, his fingers flipping to a report in his binder. "I hear your concern, ma'am," he said, his drawl softening the critique. "But I've got here a study from the Federal Reserve, pretty reliable folks, that says inflation has been driven primarily by supply chain bottlenecks, energy price spikes, and post-pandemic demand. Corporate profits are up, sure, but they account for less than 10% of recent price increases, according to the data. Your post didn't mention those other factors, just corporate greed. Were you aware of the Fed's findings, or was your statement more about rallying folks around a particular narrative?" The question was surgical, exposing the oversimplification in AOC's post while giving her a chance to explain. The gallery murmured, reporters typing furiously as AOC's aides looked increasingly uneasy. "Senator, I'm aware of the complex factors behind inflation." AOC replied, her tone slightly defensive. "My point was to highlight how some corporations exploit crises to boost profits, which exacerbates the burden on families. I stand by that, and I've cited reports from consumer advocacy groups to support it." She tried to pivot, emphasizing intent over specifics. But Kennedy was relentless. His next question already loaded. "That's a fair point, ma'am," he said, his voice calm. "But when you say price gouging without mentioning supply chains or energy costs, it paints a picture that's not quite complete. Folks reading your post, working parents, small business owners, might think corporations are the sole driver of their higher bills. I've got letters here from constituents in Louisiana who saw your post and asked why their gas prices were blamed on greed when global oil markets were in turmoil. Did you consider how your words might shape public perception, especially when the full picture is more nuanced?" The question underscored AOC's influence and responsibility, turning her rhetorical strength into a liability. The business owners in the gallery nodded, their frustration palpable as AOC struggled to respond. "Senator, my goal is to advocate for policies that protect consumers." AOC said, her voice steady but strained. "I rely on a range of sources, and I'm always open to refining my message to be clearer. But the core issue, corporate profiteering, is real and needs addressing. Her answer was principled, but Kennedy's line of questioning had revealed a pattern: bold claims that captured attention but faltered under scrutiny. He flipped to another page, his smile unwavering, ready to press further. "Let's look at one more example," Kennedy said, his tone as courteous as ever. "Last spring you tweeted, 'Canceling student debt would boost the economy by putting billions back in people's pockets.' That's a big claim, ma'am, and it got a lot of folks excited. Millions of retweets, I reckon. Could you share the evidence behind that? Particularly how it would boost the economy?" Kennedy knew the issue was complex, with economists divided on the economic impact of debt cancellation. He had reports showing potential benefits, but also risks like increased deficits or inflation. His question was designed to test AOC's grasp of the policy she championed. AOC's eyes lit up, her passion evident. Senator, canceling student debt would free up disposable income for millions of Americans, allowing them to buy homes, start businesses, or save for retirement. Studies like one from the Center for American Progress estimate it could add $250 billion to GDP over a decade. That's real economic stimulus. Her response was enthusiastic, but Kennedy's expression remained neutral, his fingers resting on a highlighted report. "I appreciate the enthusiasm, ma'am," he said, his drawl measured. "But I've got here a study from the Congressional Budget Office, nonpartisan mind you, that says canceling $1.6 trillion in student debt could increase the deficit by the same amount and potentially fuel inflation, offsetting some of those economic gains. Your tweet didn't mention the costs or risks, just the benefits. Were you aware of the CBO's findings, or was your post more about inspiring folks than laying out the full picture?" The question was another masterstroke exposing the selective framing in AOC's rhetoric. The gallery grew silent, the weight of Kennedy's logic undeniable as AOC's aides whispered frantically. "Senator, I'm familiar with the trade-offs." AOC replied, her voice slightly tighter. "My focus was on the transformative potential of debt relief for millions of borrowers. The costs can be managed through progressive taxation and other revenue measures. My tweet was meant to highlight the human impact, not delve into every detail." She tried to reframe, but Kennedy's relentless precision had painted her as someone whose rhetoric outpaced her command of the facts. He leaned back, his smile gentle but triumphant, his binder still brimming with evidence. "Ma'am, I don't doubt your sincerity," Kennedy said, his voice soft but firm. "But when a member of Congress makes claims like these, folks take them seriously. They expect precision, especially on issues that affect their wallets. Your posts have tremendous reach, and that comes with a responsibility to be clear and accurate." His words hung in the air, a quiet indictment of AOC's rhetorical style. The room remained silent, the gallery absorbing the exchange as Kennedy prepared to shift gears. He had exposed a pattern of bold but shaky claims, and he wasn't done. The battle of words was far from over, but Senator John Kennedy had drawn first blood, his intellect and preparation shining through every question. Senator John Kennedy leaned back in his chair, his binder open to a section of carefully highlighted notes, his Louisiana drawl poised to cut through the tense air of Hart Senate Office Building, Room 216. The hearing on campaign finance transparency had already seen Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez grapple with defending her social media claims, and now Kennedy was ready to zero in on her campaign's financial practices. His pale blue eyes, sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses, fixed on AOC, who sat across from him, her tailored blazer crisp, her expression a mix of confidence and wariness. With a gentle smile, Kennedy began, his voice warm but resolute. Representative Ocasio-Cortez. Let's turn to your campaign's finances. The American people trust their elected officials to handle donor money with care, and I'd like to clarify some concerns that have come up. AOC nodded, her posture steady. I'm happy to address any questions, Senator, she replied, her tone firm but cautious. She had faced scrutiny over her fundraising before, often framing it as pushback against her progressive agenda. But Kennedy was no ordinary critic. His team had spent months poring over Federal Election Commission (FEC) filings, expense reports, and consulting contracts, uncovering patterns that raised questions about transparency. His binder was an arsenal of evidence, and he had consulted campaign finance experts to ensure every question was airtight. Let's start with a specific expenditure, Kennedy said, flipping to a highlighted page. FEC records show your campaign paid $200,000 to Bright Future Strategies from 2019 to 2020 for digital outreach and fundraising. That's a hefty sum, ma'am. Could you explain what services they provided to justify that amount? The question was direct testing AOC's openness about her spending. AOC leaned forward, her voice confident. Senator Bright, Future Strategies managed our digital advertising, email campaigns, and fundraising events, which were vital to our grassroots success. Their work helped us reach millions of supporters. Her response was polished, but Kennedy's smile remained unyielding. He had anticipated her broad explanation and was ready to dig deeper. I appreciate that, ma'am, he said, his drawl softening the edge. But I've got an FEC filing here showing $50,000 paid in 1 month for consulting services, while other vendors handled ads and emails. What unique work did this firm do that others didn't cover? The question exposed the vagueness of the expense, and the gallery stirred reporters jotting notes as AOC's aides exchanged nervous glances. Senator, they coordinated our overall online strategy, ensuring consistent messaging. AOC replied, her tone steady. Every dollar was reported to the FEC. Kennedy nodded, pulling another page. Proper reporting's important, ma'am, but a watchdog group notes Bright Future Strategies is owned by a close associate of your campaign manager. I'm not suggesting wrongdoing, but when a firm tied to a key staffer gets such payments, it raises questions about conflicts of interest. Did you review their qualifications before awarding these contracts? The question hinted at favoritism, and activists in the gallery nodded, their folders open to similar data. AOC's jaw tightened slightly. Senator, we chose vendors based on expertise. Their track record helped us win, and I trust my team's decisions. Kennedy pressed on, his voice calm. I hear your trust, ma'am, but let's look at another expense. FEC records show $15,000 for travel to California, listed as fundraising, but overlapping with a non-campaign conference. Were those trips solely for campaign purposes, or did they include personal benefits? The question suggested potential misuse of funds, and reporters typed faster, sensing a story. Senator, those trips supported our national outreach, AOC said, her voice strained. All expenses followed FEC guidelines. Kennedy's drawl stayed measured. Ma'am, the filings show first-class flights and luxury hotels. Do those align with the grassroots image you champion, or might they erode donor trust? The question was sharp, framing her spending as out of touch. The room grew silent, his logic heavy. AOC paused, her tone careful. Senator, we're transparent and comply with all rules. I'd welcome any review to ensure trust. Kennedy's smile widened. That's good to hear, ma'am. Would you support an independent audit to verify every dollar was spent for campaign purposes? The question was a trap, forcing AOC to choose between scrutiny or evasion. My records are open, she replied, cautious. Kennedy had exposed a pattern of questionable spending, his intellect shining, setting the stage for further reckoning. The silence in Hart Senate Office Building Room 216 was heavy as Senator John Kennedy closed his binder, his gentle smile a quiet testament to the storm he had unleashed. The hearing on campaign finance transparency had ended, but its ripples were already spreading far beyond the chamber. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez rose from her seat. Her tailored blazer still sharp, but her confident stride wavered her expression, a blend of resolve and uncertainty. Kennedy's relentless, courteous questioning, probing her social media claims, and murky campaign spending had exposed vulnerabilities in her carefully crafted image. The Louisiana senator, with his razor-sharp intellect and Southern charm, had delivered a masterclass in accountability, earning nods from the gallery of activists, small business owners, and reporters. As Chairman Johnson called for a recess, the room buzzed with murmurs, the weight of the moment undeniable. AOC's aides rushed to her side, their faces tense as they navigated a throng of reporters outside. The fallout was immediate and fierce. Clips of Kennedy's pointed questions about vague payments to bright future strategies, lavish California travel, and overstated policy claims flooded news outlets and social media. Headlines screamed Kennedy challenges AOC's campaign finances, and AOC faces tough questions on transparency. Her once unshakable online base fractured. Loyal supporters rallied, framing the hearing as a partisan hit, but others, especially small donors, voiced betrayal. "I donated thinking it was for grassroots work," one tweeted, "not luxury hotels." Polls in her district showed a dip in approval, with voters citing doubts about her financial judgment. Progressive allies offered public support, but private whispers urged her to address the concerns head-on, wary of the controversy's stain. Kennedy, by contrast, emerged as a paragon of principled scrutiny. Reporters lauded his methodical approach, one calling him a Southern gentleman who wields evidence like a blade. Grassroots activists who had long tracked AOC's spending praised his focus on donor trust, while small business owners appreciated his defense of fiscal responsibility. His office was flooded with letters from voters nationwide thanking him for holding power to account. Political analysts coined his style the Kennedy method, a blend of civility, preparation, and unyielding logic that dismantled rhetoric without resorting to personal attacks. He showed how to question without vilifying, one commentator wrote, suggesting his approach could redefine political discourse. Kennedy remained modest, telling aides, "This isn't about me. It's about ensuring the public's trust in those who serve." The consequences for AOC were profound. Fundraising faltered as donors hesitated, questioning how their contributions were spent. Her influence within her party dimmed, with colleagues quietly distancing themselves to avoid the fallout's taint. Watchdog groups, citing Kennedy's evidence, called for a Federal Election Commission (FEC) audit of her campaign, amplifying pressure for transparency. AOC issued a statement pledging to review her campaign's practices and cooperate with any inquiries, but the damage was done. Her image as a grassroots champion was tarnished, replaced by doubts about her ethical judgment. Yet, she remained defiant, addressing supporters in a video, "I'll keep fighting for working families, no matter the challenges." Her resilience was notable, but the hearing had altered her path, forcing her to rebuild trust with a skeptical public. The hearing's broader impact lay in its lesson about accountability. Kennedy's performance underscored that no one, no matter how charismatic or popular, is above scrutiny. His evidence-based approach proved that truth delivered with respect could pierce through spin and rhetoric. For voters, the takeaway was clear: elected officials must honor the trust placed in them, particularly with donor funds. AOC's missteps highlighted the need for transparency, reminding public servants to align their actions with their promises. The lesson was not about punishment, but growth. It urged leaders to embrace integrity, knowing that lapses in judgment could erode public confidence. As Kennedy later told a reporter, trust is earned through actions, not words. And it's fragile. The story of the hearing became a touchstone for broader reflection. Kennedy's method inspired lawmakers and citizens alike, showing that accountability could be pursued without division. His success was a reminder that democracy thrives when leaders are held to high standards not by personal attacks, but by facts and reason. For AOC, the hearing was a setback, but also an opportunity to reflect and rebuild, proving her commitment through actions, not just words. The narrative wasn't about one senator or one representative. It was about the principle that public service demands transparency and responsibility. For every American watching the lesson was enduring those who serve must answer to the people and truth. When wielded with care, remains the ultimate force. Kennedy's quiet triumph in Room 216 was a beacon illuminating the path toward a politics rooted in integrity. As the nation moved forward, his example lingered a call to hold power accountable with civility and conviction, ensuring that trust once earned is never betrayed.